Hey guys, this is Ryan. Just letting you know we are still on break for Thursday. So we're going to actually go back in time and do an episode that we recorded before Drive-In Double Feature ever started. We're going to be doing Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which was a really fun conversation we did. But this is the last episode of our little break. We will be back on Tuesday once again to provide you regular content once again. But thank you so much for listening and supporting us, and let's listen in.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes! Attack of the Killer Tomatoes! They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch. They're marching down the halls, they're crawling up the walls, they're gooey, gushy, squishy, mushy, rotten to the core, they're standing outside your door.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Trashy Boys. I'm Ryan.
I'm Nathan.
And today we'll be talking about 1978 Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Now, what have you heard about this movie beforehand, Nathan?
It's crazy. I've just heard it's really bad. That's all I've heard my whole life. I know George Clooney's in the sequel. I just heard from people, oh, it's like a horrible movie, it's so bad it's good kind of deal. And that's about it. I don't know a lot about this movie. I was very under the radar with Attack of the Killer Tomatoes stuff.
Well, my personal experience, I used to love when I was a kid going into the video store and looking at different movie titles. And, a lot of times I didn't even, half the time I wasn't ever going to rent any of these movies, but I just loved looking at the box art for a lot of things. And like other ones I had vague memories of, or like The Ice Cream Man with Clint Howard, or like the box art for that. But anyway, I get to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and I see the box art for it and I'm just like, what? Like Killer Tomatoes? So you see it and I'm like, I gotta check it out. And I remember watching it, and eventually I found it again at a used video store. So I also bought it again on VHS after renting it for the first time.
Wow, that amazing.
And it was one of those that like I always had on a constant rotation of like probably once a year watching it when I was younger, just because I do remember it fondly, but I do remember watching the sequel far more than I watched the original. But
really?
Yeah. But it's one of those that before we watched it, it's like I remembered it really fondly and I'm like, maybe it's time to revisit this movie.
Yeah. And how did you feel?
Well, so I mean, first thing we should kind of say like when I was watching as a kid, I'm thinking this is like a real super serious movie,
really?
like
that's funny.
Like I'm like, oh well, like this is how all horror movies are. Obviously, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot of perspective because this is like one of those, like it's like a parody movie. It's just like Airplane, except it's like mocking a lot of the sci-fi, like thriller, like real, like basic, like oh, the government's been creating these monsters and all that. So it was kind of like oh, this movie had a lot more jokes than I remembered.
Yeah.
And I will say there are some that definitely made me chuckle. And I thought, and I do think there actually are some pretty creative jokes in here too at the same time, but it's a little too much. Some of them, it's just like with Airplane, it's like there's so many jokes in there, but they're so good. It's like you don't even notice them like coming at you. And this one, it's like when it doesn't land, you're like, okay. So it kind of like drags a little bit.
Exact same thoughts. I think like this movie is genuinely funny. Like it gave me some really great laughs, but it's definitely like the same vein as like those parody movies from like the 70s and maybe early 80s of we're just going to make a ton of jokes and we're not even going to care what sticks. We're just going to give them out. And it fails sometimes. But there's some kind of charm to this movie that I personally found hard to hate. Like looking at like people like that I read reviews of a lot, they just like totally hate this movie. Like this movie gets
Yeah,
hated so bad, and it has a charm to me that I just somehow come out of it enjoying it, even if I find the joke's not funny. I think it's cool that they made the joke.
yeah. I mean, like, I don't. Even if you don't like this movie, I don't think there's anything like incredibly bad about it. There's not. I mean, if you don't think it's funny, that's one thing. But to be like, oh, this is a terrible movie. I mean, you got to give it a lot of perspective too. I mean, this movie predates Airplane, so there really was. I mean, I don't feel like there was a whole lot like that. Maybe. I mean, like there was like directly parodying a lot of these type of movies. So, I, I mean, I think it for the time it was probably pretty original, and even still, there actually are some original jokes that actually still hold up in it.
I totally agree. But I guess to get into like the meat of this movie, even though the tomatoes don't have meat in them,
Unless it's a beefsteak tomato.
that is true. A beef, yeah. Was that joke made in the movie? I sure hope so.
I hope so.
But it starts off with like a movie scroll, like a text scroll about like, oh, everyone laughed at the Hitchcock's The Birds, and then Birds actually took over, which is funny. I thought this movie, the town Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I lived there for a few years. That's where my mom
Oh,
and my brother were born, which is wacky to me to see the name of that city in this.
were they attacked by birds?
They were not attacked by. Well, actually, I don't think my mom was born that year. It was what, 1975? No, my mom was born in 1975. So probably not. Has no memory
But
of it.
did you look at? I mean, was that like a real incident, or were they just being funny?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I actually I'll have to look into that. But Hopkinsville is like known to have weird stuff happen. They have like this incident called the Hopkinsville Goblin, where like an alien came down and terrorized multiple like farms in the area, and like
Really?
multiple like people have like stories about this that aren't connected. Interesting stuff. It's like a weird town with I think some weird stories. So I wouldn't be surprised. I really wouldn't.
That'd be really funny if that was. I thought that when they did that, I thought they were just being funny. I didn't think this was like an actual real thing that occurred,
Mm-hmm. You know
which
what?
it could be, but we'll find out.
I'll do my research. But yeah, so now it's like, oh, hey, now this movie's about attacking tomatoes. Don't laugh at it. This is as serious as it gets.
And apparently, there was a lot of people that didn't laugh at it, according to these reviews.
Right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you kind of get the idea of like it's going to be something really ridiculous because the very opening scene is just a woman in a kitchen, and then like a tomato comes out of the sink, and you just hear like this weird like like noise, and like the woman just like gets backed into a corner, and there's just this regular tomato just like corners her, and then you just hear screaming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just off the bat, this movie has such a cheap film look. It was made for $100,000, and it just looks so cheap. I love it. I love the look of this movie. It adds to the trashiness of it that I think fits so well with this show.
I know the quality was great,
Uh-huh.
and then we get the theme, which like. It's one of those songs that gets stuck in your head because even afterwards, I'm like, "Attack of the killer tomatoes." Dun, 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 dun.
It's good. It's good. I don't. Have you ever seen the cartoon?
I vaguely remember it, but
Okay, I was
no.
gonna say, is this the theme of the cartoon? I would assume so. It's too good not to show up again.
Well, so not to spoil it, but the sequel is just the same song, but they took out Attack and put Return.
That's pretty good. I like that. That's very much in line with what this movie is. But yeah, once we get that really great theme, it becomes like it's like a cop movie, right? And political. It's a cop political journalism movie and about attacking killer tomatoes. It grapples so much.
It's really reminiscent of a lot of. It's sure it's parroting a lot of monster movies, but it's also kind of parroting those like 1970s like government is like out to get me, like I'm like man versus government type of thing, like 3 Days of Condor
Hmm.
or like the Jackal, or just things like that, where it's just like like it's like this big government conspiracy and like one man's like unraveling this mystery.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is very similar to that. Maybe it also, I guess it's more than like Attack of the Ants or something like that, Attack of a Giant Grasshopper type of deal. Because even in the beginning, a bunch of swimmers die, and it's like Jaws. That's a parody of
Yeah,
Jaws, which had just come out not that long ago. It definitely tackles a lot, as did Airplane, because Airplane in title is making fun of one movie, but was making fun of a ton at the same time.
right.
Yeah.
And they I remember, and then also too, like rewatching it, the movie kind of opens like the tomatoes are attacking like the town, like it's full force, like they don't hold back, they show the tomatoes all the time. And there's one scene where there's a helicopter and it crashes, and you think that the tomatoes have like destroyed this helicopter, I was thinking, I was like, oh wow, it looks really good. And then you look on IMDb, they're like, oh no, that was a real helicopter crashing.
Yeah, no, that's like the most action-packed part of this movie. Like it is like that explosion and everything. The first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh my god, does this thing have a real budget behind it?" And then the answer is no. But
No, they were supposed to just land a helicopter, but instead the tail propeller ended up hitting the ground, and then it just and then it just crashed.
wow, that's awesome.
Uh, yeah, there's a lots of little jokes like that. Like when we get to like the government scene, when they're kind of explaining all this together, like the majors are like all like, oh, where did you get that badge from? I was like, oh, I got this badge from the sack race.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. And like there's like a scene where, because what it is they are trying to discredit this whole tomato thing as like, it's not that big of a deal. Like killer
Yeah.
tomatoes is not that big of a deal. There's a really great scene with the press conference, and like a kid, he's like, oh yeah, I can take the question from the child in the back, and the child hits him with the most hard-hitting question, and he
Yeah,
starts sweating. It's really just a good bit.
I know. There's really funny stuff like that, or like there's a lot of like government like government's not doing anything, where it's like holding up the whole process. Like they start planning a committee, and like
Mhm.
they're trying to like think of like these actions, how to counteract these tomatoes, and they spend like, oh well, did we not have enough forms, like where do we need to look for another form, and like they just spend time looking. And then like there's another scene where it's like, okay, we're going to vote that we don't do anything at this time.
That sounds about right.
So
There, and this is like a lot of this takes place like in this office that's extremely tiny, too tiny for everybody, and people have to like climb over tables. It's just like slapsticky stuff. It's silly.
yeah. Another clever joke that I like was there was like this a couple, and they're watching this tomato like break into their house, and it's like, oh, there's the tomato eating our son Timmy, and it's just totally monotone, like they don't care at all.
Yeah.
And then later they run into Mason Dixon, who's the main character of the movie, and he's like, hey, you want a free crib, you want to use crib, or
Oh my god. Yeah, yeah. And I do want to like, Mason Dixon has like a team of people. Sam Smith, like the singer. Yeah, Sam Smith is a disguise expert who dresses up the whole movie. With a great, one of the best bits in the movie. Just to put it in perspective, this is a black dude, and he plays Adolf Hitler as the
yeah.
disguise, and he just puts on the Hitler mustache, and it's good stuff. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Well, then like there's another guy that's also in the group, Finn Letter, who's like this gung-ho military guy, and he's an idiot too. So and
Yeah.
when he sees this black man dressed up as Hitler, he thinks it's the real Hitler, and he's like, oh my god, it's Adolf Hitler.
Uh-huh.
And he tries
And that scene, that character is so bizarre to me. Like he like parachutes, and he doesn't parachute. He has a parachute. He's pulling around the whole movie. People like step on it. There's like a scene where a car runs over it. Like
yeah, there's one scene where he's chasing a guy and he's having to like climb over these obstacles while like picking up the full parachute and like trying to jump over a fence holding the parachute.
uh-huh. And then on the side, there's another character named Lois who is our reporter, and she's reporting on everything or trying to like get the lowdown on all this tomato commotion. I do want to mention one joke with her that I think falls flat, but something about it I love because it's just so like so bad. Is the whole thing whenever Clark walks by, and then come to find out he's Superman. But she doesn't look at it. The guy he's talking to is like, "Oh, look, it's Superman," and the Superman music plays. It's a bad joke, but I can't believe they put it in the movie.
Oh yeah, and then it's like, oh, and then he says, "Hi, Lois." He's like, "Oh, hi, Clark."
Yeah, I love. What I like about this movie is that it's almost ambitious with the jokes it tries. It's just like, I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm just going to make this joke, whatever.
Well, I mean, so one thing I look for in a parody movie, because I mean, there's absolutely bad parody movies. I mean, a bad parody is self-referential type stuff. Like, there's no jokes. The punchline is that, oh, this thing that that's not in this movie is in this movie. It's like, oh, hey, look, it's Kim Kardashian. And then like a piano falls on her or something like that. And you don't know why or she's there. It doesn't explain anything. It's just like, that's the joke. Did you laugh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that's probably what the downfall of the parody movie was, that whole era of parody movies. And now we don't really get anything like that anymore.
No, which is a shame, because I mean, there are a lot of really good ones. I mean, even the Zucker brothers, when they made Kentucky Fried Movie, that's a really good one.
I have a soft spot for Loaded Weapon. I really do. And that's a later one, but I do like that one a lot.
Oh yeah, and the Mel Brooks movies too, of course. Like, and
those are
Robin
classics.
Hood. Yeah, those are all really good. I love those.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you did say like they were trying to play this off like it wasn't a big deal. So they actually hire an ad man to like, can you think of like some type of like campaign to where people really aren't like afraid of these and of like these things? Like, oh yeah, I could do all kinds. He's like, I've sold, he was just naming all these like accomplishments he was able to do. And then he breaks into like this big musical number.
Yeah, this is when the movie becomes a musical.
Yeah.
Other than the theme song, there are other songs in the movie. I don't think they go on for a little too long for my taste, but you know what? I think it's cool that's in this. I think it's pretty funny.
I was about to say, this is not like, oh, they just start singing and stop. They do a 2-minute musical number for each one of these songs.
Yeah.
But oh yeah, so one of these like, oh yeah, here's this other ad campaign I worked on, and it's like this blind cop like directing traffic. It's like, he's just a regular man, just like you and me, and except he's blind, and you just hear all these cars crashing when he's directing traffic.
Yeah, that was a good bit. Oh God, we didn't even mention there's a Japanese person on the team.
Oh yeah,
who is dubbed horribly in English. Has some really great jokes. Thought that whole bit was good.
The one thing I was not expecting, which obviously goes over your head when you're a little kid, is when there's a picture of the USS Arizona, and he bumps it. He bumps into it, and it falls into an aquarium.
That was like, good.
Yeah, I was not expecting that.
When you're a kid, you're just like, oh, okay, weird, but all right, it happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, you don't think of anything. Like, you don't pay attention to who's dubbing. I'm like 6 years or 7, 8 years old watching it, and I don't even know what a dubbed actor is. It's just you see that, and you're like, oh, that's just how he talks. That's his normal speaking
True,
voice.
true.
um, yeah. So, but like I said, so you kind of figure out Mason Dixon's kind of like this guy they hire to figure out what's going on with the tomatoes attack and how to stop it. And what we begin to find out is that there's somebody that does not want him to find out what the secret is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one scene where he's just walking down the sidewalk and an assassin's trying to shoot him, but he keeps missing and he doesn't notice. So it keeps hitting like all these random people, and he just goes on about his day.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's pretty funny bits too. Like they say, like, oh, just the mere mention of the word tomato has got people in hysteria. And there's a guy like sitting in a library and it's totally crowded, and this guy just like looks up with a smirk on his face and he just says tomato, and then everyone just runs out screaming.
Yeah, and I thought that was such an interesting joke, because that's like the closest to like a Family Guy cutaway gag, right? Where it just like cuts away to that almost, and then like that's it. That's the whole joke.
Yeah,
but that's one of those memorable points.
Yeah, and in that same like breath, they were also doing the one where they were like, "Oh, they're running from Chicago," and it's just these people running down a sidewalk, and it's like, "And they're running from New York," and then they're running in the opposite. They're just running back and forth, like pretending they're running to these different states.
Yeah, whoever like wrote this like was going at like 1,000,000 miles per hour. Like they were thinking about everything.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking this movie was a lot more dry. I remember when I was like a kid, because like I said, a lot of these jokes would just go over my head. But now watching it now, I'm like, oh, this is like there's pretty much a joke almost every scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it never really gets the chance to like slow down. There's also like these weird jokes with Lois where people keep mentioning her butt. And also, like, the dude keeps trying to, I think towards the end of the movie, like, he's like, oh, you should use your womanly body to attract the other person.
Well, it's like her boss, it wasn't it? Like, that was
her boss.
like,
that's right, yeah.
It was because she's a reporter, and she's trying to break this big story about the tomatoes. And he's like, oh, well, just use your womanly body. And it's really, I mean, it's really redundant of the 1970s. So you kind of see like at that perspective. I mean, even with the Japanese guy, they call him like, a couple of racial slurs. So it's just, it's definitely of its time. I mean, it's really, some is really unfortunate, but again, it's of its time.
Yes, it's very, very of its time.
So anyway, they eventually they figure out it was the press secretary all along was trying to get. I mean, we're going to say spoilers just because the story is not really that important. But the press secretary was the one behind it because he was trying to make the president look incompetent, so that way he would be the new leader of the world. And it's really funny because the Mason Dixon's like, he has like a gun that the press secretary doesn't know about, and you think he's going to just he's got the press secretary right where he wants him. He just wants to find out like how to stop the tomatoes. And he's like, oh, well, it's quite simple. Let me just tell you. And then as he's about to say it, Finleiter runs in and just stabs him and just murders him right in front. And Mason Dixon is so unbelievably angry. He just points the gun at Finleiter. Like, you, like about to just shoot him.
And then what? God. Okay, yeah. And then after that, they figure out how to take down these tomatoes, and that's with the song "Puberty Love," which is
it's a very it's a really funny song. It's a teenager that's going through puberty, so its voice is just cracking like the whole time while it's singing.
Yeah, and it's so another thing that's like bizarre to me, and I don't know if it's a spoof of something at the time that I'm just like not aware of. I think it's funny. I think it's a funny joke, just the idea that there's a song called Puberty Love. Just
right.
bizarre.
I just kind of took it as like there was all these really terrible love songs during the 70s, and it was just kind of parroting that sort
That
of
makes
thing.
sense. Yeah.
But did you look up to see who actually sang the song Puberty Love?
No, who sings it?
This one was a wild fact. Do you know the guy Matt Cameron from Pearl Jam and Soundgarden?
What? Really?
The drum, the,
The
the
drummer.
drum. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it said. It said he sang the
What the?
Puberty Love,
That's
which I
so
mean,
weird.
which he would have been 16 at the time, so it checks out.
Yeah, that's puberty love. That is wacky. That's a really good fact to have up your sleeve.
Yeah, there
One
you go.
day at
So
trivia night, that's gonna just like you're gonna win it all with that one.
I mean, go on your Wikipedia page. It says right here, 1978, under the pseudonym Fu Cameron, he sang the song "Puberty Love," which was featured in the movie Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I like that. That's good.
Um, but okay, so we're getting towards like the end of the movie where they're like, okay, we got to get them into this. Get them. We got to get. We got to get all the tomatoes into like one location so that way we can play the song. So he's like, gather everybody up in the town. He's like, all that's left is just a bunch of crazy people that stayed. So that's fine. Just bring them. And I don't know if you noticed, but in that crowd scene, some guys dressed up as Leatherface.
I did not notice that.
Oh yeah, they have like the Cincinnati chick or the chicken San Diego chick, whatever. It's like the big giant chicken, a guy in a giant chicken costume. They have somebody dressed up like it's like they just raided a costume store just to see what they had, and just to make them look like they're crazy. And then they play Puberty Love, and all the tomatoes shrink, and then they end up stomping on them.
But there's one bit, I know it's like the end of the movie, that I really like, where a tomato's wearing like earmuffs, and they have to, and he shows them the sheet music, and that kills him. I thought that was pretty good.
That was pretty clever. But probably the one that I like the most is right at the end of the movie. So throughout the whole movie, Mason and Lois have had zero like chemistry together. They have not shown any type of like love for each other, like they're gonna date or anything like that. You know, usually like they kind of tease these sort of things, but it kind of makes fun of a lot of those sci-fi movies where it's just like the male and the female lead have to get together, even though they never even had any romantic interest in the beginning. So that's what happens. They just say like, "Oh, bye Lois. Oh, bye Mason." They're like, "Wait a minute, Lois, Mace," and they just start singing together like they fell in love. And he's a shorter guy, and he runs into her arms, and she like carries him like a bride.
Yeah. And honestly, this like first watch, like, or I was confused. I seriously was like, what? Did they do anything this whole movie? Where is this coming from? And then it like hit me like, oh, that's the joke. Got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so overall, I mean, I really like. It's not one I would actively seek out or anything like that. But you know, like this is like one of those movies you'd watch on like that would be on like Comedy Central or like the Sci-Fi Channel on like a Saturday morning or something, and you'd watch. And I mean, like I said, I don't think it's a bad movie. It's not great by any means, but I don't think it's as bad as everybody's ever made it out to be.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. I think it's a silly good time, you know. I think if you're into like spoof or like older spoof movies, this is like gonna be right up your alley. It's not that bad. And it's before a time whenever, you know, movies were trying to be bad, like it was attempting to like just be so bad it was a good movie. It kind of just fits in a really nice niche of its own. I like.
Yeah, and you know, you don't really see a whole lot of movies like that. You know, now, like you said, they're a dime a dozen. It's like if there's some big franchise that comes out, there's inevitably going to be something coming out mocking it. Like, oh, well, Twilight did a bunch of movies. We got to make a Twilight parody movie, or Fast and Furious. We got to make a parody of Fast and Furious. So it's total cash cow. But this one, it really did feel like there was. Like they were really big fans of those types of movies that were coming out, and they were trying to directly parody a lot of those types of movies. Because I mean, during the time, you did have a lot of movies that were supposed to be 100% serious, like a giant spider is coming to the town, or like a giant praying mantis or a lizard or whatever. So it's just it's kind of like they ran out of ideas, so Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is all they had left.
Exactly. And also, I looked it up. That bird attack really did happen. That was a real event that happened.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected.
Yeah, kind of wild.
Well, I'm still waiting on the big tomato attack. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm scared for it, and the listeners at home should be as well.
Yeah, no one's laughing now.
That's what they all say.
But and this movie, like we said, is not only generated it generated 3 sequels and a Saturday morning cartoon. So it had something there. Either that,
really did it all.
Either that, there wasn't a whole lot of options. Either way, check it out.
Yeah, I think you should check it out for sure.
The police have gone on strike today. The National Guard has run away. Tomatoes will have their day. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch. Munch,